demoralization. Right. So...
And to just expand on that, the entire education system is hyper-feminine. Young men that tend to be more restless, sit down and shut up and read Jane Austen, which of course Jane Austen's great, but are young men being molded into the future leaders of society, or are they being scolded just for their existence? We now get back to some biographical elements. And just a reminder, I did not go to college. I took a gap year. It's been 13 gap years. Dr. Peterson did a great job of prodding and building out the biographical story of Turning Point USA. He asked questions that no one has ever asked about the origin story of what is now the greatest mass movement in the country, which is Turning Point USA. And thanks to all of you who support it. Dr. Peterson did a phenomenal job as an interviewer, really getting down to the root of where this came from and the foundational and the philosophical roots of it. Watch.
All right, now you're being called, you're advertising on social media. Let's go back and tell this whole story. So, because I'm very curious about it. So you had an intuition that you could go to campuses. Okay, so tell me where'd that idea come from? Do you think?
Well, I never went to college. First of all, which is...
Right, you've been to many colleges.
I've been to more colleges than most people. You might have me beat, but I've been to well over 200 campuses across this country.
No, you've got me beat.
Yeah, I mean, almost every college. You can imagine. I've either given a lecture, a speech, or started a chapter there.
Yeah. So my daughter doesn't have a university degree, so she started a university. So that's very
good.
comical.
Exactly.
I know, but this is good. Okay, so that means you do have a university education. You just got it a very different way.
That's right.
Okay, so you decided. That's interesting too, because it's like I asked you what your motivation for doing this was, and the first thing you said was that you didn't have a degree. So that's very interesting. So what, were you also curious about going to campuses? Like,
yes, and that's really a great point. So just as a little background, I wanted to go to West Point. I didn't get in. I told my parents I would take a gap year to kind of figure this out because I saw some momentum of a local political group that was out of the cookie group, by the way.
Okay.
That kind of kept growing. I said, I want to keep this going and play this out, see where this can be.
This was after high school, after high school.
Yeah, that's correct. That was the summer I graduated high school.
Okay.
A really amazing mentor by the name of Bill Montgomery, may he rest in peace, was the only guy ever. He said, Charlie, you shouldn't go to college. I was like, that's the most radical thing someone could say. So that idea was planted in my head. And I said, okay, I'll just take a gap year. I'll kind of figure things out.
Why did he tell you that?
He thought, in his own words, he sensed an entrepreneurial gift and skill that I had.
Right.
And a drive. He was a kind of an entrepreneur himself.
Okay, so he could see the entrepreneurial part of you, and he didn't think that would work well in college.
Yeah, and he said, you have to go create, not just go.
Oh, good. Oh, that was
what he said.
I see. Okay.
You have to go build. He said, you have something in you. You have a drive. You have a passion. You have a relentless kind of spirit. And he says, you shouldn't go to college. And that was the most radical thing that a suburban kid in Chicago could hear, because everyone would go to college.
Of course.
It's a mark of failure not to go to college.
Yeah,
And so not getting into West Point was very demoralizing. However, it was the greatest gift ever from the Lord, because I took the gap year, and to your credit, which is no one's ever put this together, all my friends were in college. So I would start visiting my friends in colleges. So you think about it, because I would go to high school, I would graduate high school, I still am friends with all my high school friends. So I'd go to University of Iowa, University of Illinois to go visit them, Northwestern. And I realized as I was trying to get this political thing off the ground, this is where it all stemmed from. And I was trying to put pieces together that the academy was where the fight needed
definitely.
To go towards. Yeah. And simultaneously, as I was trying to find funding and trying to get donors behind our effort, something that almost every wealthy person that I would encounter is they had a soft spot and a interest in trying to invest in college campuses, especially conservative-leaning philanthropists and business types in America. I think about 2012.
That's turned around to bite them pretty damn hard.
Oh, yeah, but it would get their attention, right? So here I would be at a cocktail party, and I'd be 18, 19 years old trying to get funding, trying to get someone's attention. They say, okay, what do you do? I said, well, I'm trying to bring conservatism to college campuses. Oh, really? And they would be sincere. They would lean in.
Right.
They'd say, well, what about my alma mater? Have you spoke there? And so I'd have a little connection. I'd say, well, maybe I could visit there if we have a little bit of money. And so it helped. So I had interest from the donor community.
Right. So you could see that there was an opening there, a door that was opening.
And I had no idea how big that opening was. And the more that I learned, some of these donors, as would say they'd give hundreds of millions of dollars to these schools.
Yeah, right.
And so they had a lot of vested interest. They were very curious about a young guy that wants to go shake up these campuses. Because remember, that's when woke was really starting to come up.
Yeah.
13, 14, 15, we saw it bubble
That's
up.
for sure.
15 was, I think, the Pearl Harbor moment. It was Michael Brown, Ferguson, Missouri, hands up, don't shoot. That's where woke started to present itself in.
Oh, you'll have to tell me why you think that event was
At least from because I think at the top of all woke elements, race was the primary, let's just say the primary fencing.
Yeah, it's the division point.
Correct. And so in 2015, when Ferguson, Missouri, the lie, the scam of hands up, don't shoot with Michael Brown, Black Lives Matter was born out of Ferguson, Missouri, actually on a college campus at University of Missouri in Columbia, Missouri. And that spread like wildfire through, of course, a lot of Democrat operatives and money being spent. Remember how long we spent on that news cycle of America's racist because of Michael Brown, and all the CNN commentators famously said, hands up and don't shoot. And we spent more time on race obsession in the last 2 years of Obama's presidency than the last 4 or 5 years prior. Yeah. And that's because—
Well, that's a hallmark of the danger of allowing race to be an issue in the presidency to begin with.
Exactly. But an underappreciated element here is Eric Holder was setting the table for that with very loyal people in the Department of Justice that believed that police were inherently racist.
Right.
They were launching investigations into very successful police departments trying to find police brutality and racial bias. And so the table was set, and that was the mini George Floyd moment of the beginning of woke.
And you know, psychologists played a role in that in a major way too, because you had Banaji and her crowd with the what do they call that? The implicit association test, completely forcing the idea of implicit bias. You know, and social psychology is a very corrupt discipline, and it has been maybe from its onset. And it's stacked from top to bottom with careerists. And it was social psychologists, for example, who denied that there was any such thing as left-wing authoritarianism until 2017. Right. That was something you didn't get to think if you were a social psychologist or even investigate. We cracked that. There was a couple of people working on it around 2016. The last bit of research I did was on left-wing authoritarianism, and then my lab blew up. You know, it just became impossible for me to continue. But so that dovetailed with this insistence that people were looking at the world through a lens that was irremediably biased in terms of their privilege and their racial and ethnic identity. And, you know, and it's tricky because people do have a tilt in the ethnocentric direction, right? Because, well, how about because you favor your family, right? You tend to favor the local. You also tend to favor the non-novel.
And the familiar.
Well, exactly. And now there are exceptions to that. Well, you see this in the Old Testament accounts because sometimes the foreigner is the best thing that ever happened. So that would be like Jethro in the story of Moses' father-in-law.
Of course, and Midian.
Yeah, exactly. And then you have the alternative that would be like Jezebel, who's the foreign devil, so to speak. Of course. And so, you know, that's a paradox that's very difficult to properly navigate.
And add on top of that, this was when woke was starting to crescendo. And that's where Turning Point USA and our impact really started to materialize. We started to realize at Turning Point USA that what we were doing to start high school and college chapters was the vanguard of civilization. I continue on this, talking with Dr. Peterson about pronouns and cultural shifts that start from the bottom up. Watch this.
Okay, so yeah, it's 2015, 2016, things went like seriously sideways. Okay,
and that's where, just to complete the point, my job on campuses became far more interesting because our organization shifted from primarily, you know, economic discussions of Marxism and capitalism to core cultural hotbed topics in 15, 16, 17. So then here we are, a 5-year-old organization with a growing infrastructure and a growing presence and a growing staffing organization. And we multiplied significantly because then the donor types, like, hold on, what happened to my alma mater? Why is it that they're burning
Right.
down UC Berkeley? Remember, Milo Yiannopoulos went to University of California, Berkeley in the spring of 17, and they burnt the whole place down. Ben Shapiro very similarly. And so we then found ourselves accidentally or through serendipity on the front lines of the American culture war.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of that that's not accidental. You know, you think about the way that you told your story. I mean, it's improbable, but you were of the temperamental type. That's that strange blend of entrepreneurial temperament and conservative temperament. Those things don't generally go together, right? The conservative temperament, you could accept the libertarians because they're probably the entrepreneurial conservatives.
And growing up, I actually was more libertarian. It's very interesting to say that.
Okay. Because, well, that's where the entrepreneurial conservatives hang out, is with the libertarians.
That's right.
Right. And they have an uneasy alliance
It's a
with
great point.
Okay.
It really
okay.
is.
And so that temperamental factor was already operating at you in high school. And then you didn't get into West Point, you said, but you were interested in universities and you obviously had the intelligence to manage them. And so, you know, it's very useful to develop an idiosyncratic pathway forward if you have the IQ horsepower to manage it, because it makes you unique if you could do that. So, okay. And so you had a mentor who told you that it's probably best for you not to go to college because you have an entrepreneurial bent. Now you're trying to build a political organization, but you're not exactly sure how. You're visiting the campuses and you have friends there, and you see that there's an opportunity to talk on campuses where you can also get an education in doing that, but also that there's donor interest. And that's very interesting too, because if you're a good entrepreneur, one of the things you do is you go talk to your marketplace always. That's the grassroots things, but also with regards to fundraisers. And you offer like 10 ideas, all of which you're interested in, and you see where the door opens. That's knocking.
Exactly right.
And so you saw that there were these people who wanted to support the education of young people, but who could see that their money was being counterproductively spent.
To say the least.
Yeah. Well, leave large piles of money laying around unguarded and see who comes in first to take it. Right. That's that parasitical type.
That's right.
They'll swarm in there like mad. That's happened in all the
And they gravitate to
foundations.
the universities.
Yeah, well, it's the same phenomena that we talked about earlier, that cluster B, narcissistic, dark tetrad, 4% of the population. They're looking around to see where, what would you say, inhabitable carcasses are lying around unintended.
And they're disproportionately represented at the academy.
Yeah.
That 4%
Yes.
might be 40% of the administrators or the professor types. Because think about it.
Increasingly that became the case.
Because they might be saying something to that target audience, the student, but they actually want to see that student become a leftist. There's a lot of Machiavellian influences in how these professors present their ideas.
Yeah, well, it's also the case that it was the Machiavellian So what happened at the university, I watched this, is that
you lived it.
The administration encroached. And that's not surprising because there was money at afoot. So why wouldn't there be competition for the funding? So the administrators, who are generally failed faculty, by the way, failed and embittered faculty. So the faculty are already embittered because they're not rich like investment bankers. And then you take embittered faculty members who couldn't make it as faculty.
Perfectly said.
So now they encroach on the faculty who are too busy doing their job and too apolitical and also too willfully blind to notice. The administration encroaches decision by decision until they radically outnumber the professors. And that's pretty much fait accompli by 2005, I would say. Mm-hmm. And then the woke mob took over the administration.
That's right.
And that took no time at all. Right. And so now that's where we're at in the universities, and I can't see how that would be reversed.
And now a really fun part of the conversation, more biographical, is how did we first find our donors? Just as a reminder, we have over 400,000 donors at Turning Point USA. You guys are welcome to donate. By the way, we have lots of giveaways where you can get books and hats. Even $5 helps us out at Turning Point USA, so please consider it. Foster Freeze, may he rest in peace, was our first donor. He wrote me a $10,000 check. And Bill Montgomery, may he also rest in peace, was an amazing mentor and friend. Without either of them, Turning Point USA would not exist. You're going to love this. If you're curious about how did an 18-year-old with no money, no connections, and no idea what he was doing start now the largest mass movement in the country, this might answer your question. And Dr. Peterson does a phenomenal job of guiding us through this discussion. Watch.
Okay, so now you tell me how you started going to campuses and what you did to begin with and how you got away with it.
So the first person who wrote us a check was a guy by the name of Foster Fries. May he also rest in peace. Amazing philanthropist. I met him very early on. I decided to go to the Republican National Convention in 2012 in pursuit of finding donors. This was August after I graduated high school.